Chapter 5. Deck the halls, not your family, unfortunately. Then came December, a season he hated more than any other. Christmas. Lakin insisted on a tree, garlands, and a party. She bought matching pajamas, made RSVPs, posed them for a holiday card he hadn't agreed to, performed. And then, as if fate were waiting to strike, a text arrived from his mother. His biological family was coming to visit. The message landed in River's inbox like a lead weight, burying itself beneath a pile of hospital memos and royalty statements for the Velvet Mask. It was an email from Vera, a tender, loving woman whose very existence, along with Adam, was a balm to his scarred soul. The subject line read, "Christmas visitors." His heart sank, a familiar cold dread spreading through him, chilling him far more than the crisp winter air outside. He knew immediately what this meant. He tried to ignore the subtle hints his mother had dropped in recent phone calls, the hopeful murmurs about reconnecting. He changed the subject, mumbled about busy shifts and looming exams, anything to avoid the inevitable. He called her later that day, finding a quiet corner in the bustling hospital cafeteria. The clatter of trays and low murmur of conversations, a dull roar around him. He needed crowd anonymity, distance. His voice was carefully neutral, a practiced detachment he often used when speaking about anything too close to his true pain. "Mom, about Christmas visitors? Who exactly are we talking about this year? Surely you're not traveling?" Her voice, warm and gentle, hummed through the phone, brimming with an almost childlike excitement. "Oh, honey, Regan reached out, and your brother Ralph, and your sister Frankie. They're coming to spend Christmas at your place. Isn't that wonderful?" Lakin said it was a great idea to have everyone together for the holidays. They really want to connect, to see you, to be a family again. River's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles turning white. At his place. The words echoed in his mind, laced with a bitter disbelief. Lakin had done this, without a word to him. Wonderful. The word tasted like ash in his mouth, dry and bitter. His biological family. The very people who had abandoned him at birth, who had then later resurfaced only to exploit him, to inflict further pain, to leave him feeling utterly unworthy. Regan, his biological mother, a woman whose every interaction with him was laced with a chilling indifference, often outright harshness, reserving her affection, her smiles, her warmth, only for Ralph and Frankie. He'd seen it for years, a pattern of blatant favoritism that sliced through him anew each time. She loved her other children, her real children, those she had kept, but for him there was only a distant, critical gaze, a reminder of his perceived failings, of the fundamental flaw he believed he carried. He also knew, with a growing sense of dread, that Frankie and Ralph weren't just innocent extensions of Regan's manipulation. They had learned her lessons well. "That's a lot, Mom," River managed, trying desperately to keep the tremor from his voice, to mask the visceral revulsion that twisted his gut. He could feel the familiar knot forming in his stomach, anticipating the emotional torture that awaited him. Not in the sanctuary of his adoptive parents' home, but in his own. "I know, darling," she said, sensing his hesitation, but attributing it to stress from his demanding medical studies, or perhaps his general reclusiveness. "But Lakin sounded so excited about hosting." She said it would be wonderful to have a big family Christmas, especially with you being so busy. "And they're such sweet people, Ralph and Frankie. They really watch you, being a doctor and all. They were so excited when they heard you were hosting them for the holidays." River swallowed the image of Frankie and Ralph. No longer simply sweet kids, but figures he associated with veiled requests and subtle digs flickering in his mind. He didn't just resent them, he felt a weary wariness. They were extensions of the wound his birth mother represented, yes, but also active participants in its perpetuation. But the thought of spending Christmas, a holiday already irrevocably laced with his own unspoken, deep-seated trauma under the same roof as Regan, Frankie, and Ralph, while simultaneously navigating Lakin's cold performance, was almost unbearable. He felt a profound sadness that his ailing adoptive mother, the beacon of his stability, believed this elaborate charade was a genuine act of reconciliation. He missed his adoptive parents already, even though he hadn't left their side. He knew their quiet presence, their unwavering love, would be a source of strength, but even their love felt like a fragile shield against the storm that was coming. "Okay, Mom," he said, forcing a semblance of enthusiasm, a thin, brittle veneer over his turmoil. "Okay, I'll be there. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone." The lie felt heavy on his tongue, but he couldn't bring himself to burden her with his true feelings. not when she was already facing so much with her illness. He hung up, the weight of the phone heavy in his hand, a symbol of the burden he carried. He loved his adopted parents fiercely, with a devotion born of gratitude and deep affection. They had given him everything, but the thought of their eventual death, especially now with his mother's illness, was a constant icy dread. He feared being truly alone, adrift without their anchor, without the only love he truly trusted. And the arrival of his biological family, those who had abandoned him and now sought to exploit him, only intensified that fear. A stark reminder of the void he always felt, the original wound. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of forced cheer. Lakin, completely oblivious to the internal turmoil gripping him, or perhaps willfully ignoring it, was in full holiday mode. She bought more extravagant gifts, planned elaborate dinners for his adopted parents and now his biological family, and constantly reminded him of the importance of family togetherness, a concept that felt utterly hollow to River, given the cold formality of their own marriage. Ireland, ever Lakin's shadow, was frequently at the apartment, her presence a constant irritant, a low-grade poison in the air. She would make snide remarks about his moods, implying he was ungrateful for Lakin's efforts, or casually bring up his late nights at the hospital, suggesting he was avoiding his responsibilities to his wife and to his newfound musical success. The implicit bullying chipped away at his already fragile peace. River spent his few free hours in his studio, churning out new music, the raw emotion of his current misery finding its way into every melody. He worked until his fingers ached, until his mind was numb, then drove to Charlie's, where the dim lights and the roar of the crowd, the temporary anonymity of his mask, offered the only true escape. He didn't care about the 7 a.m. rounds, about the exhaustion that gnawed at his bones. He needed the music, needed to disappear, needed to sing the truths he couldn't speak aloud. Then the doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent chime that sliced through the pre-Christmas calm. It was 2 days before Christmas. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of snow that hadn't yet fallen. His own sleek, modern apartment, usually filled with Lakin's expensive, cold decor and the silent tension of their marriage, was now decorated with an almost frantic display of festive lights and garlands. The smell of pine and gingerbread, likely from scented candles Lakin had strategically placed, permeated the air, adding another layer to the performance. River stood by the bay window in the living room, a half-finished cup of cold coffee in his hand, watching the black sedan pull up outside. Regan left the vehicle first. She was a striking woman, her face etched with hard lines, but with a surprising elegance in her posture, an air of refined coolness. She looked around, appraising River's apartment building, her eyes calculating. Then Lakin emerged from the apartment building entrance, a radiant, almost theatrical smile on her face, rushing forward to greet them with open arms. The two women exchanged air kisses, a performance of familiarity that made River's stomach churn. Lakin then turned to embrace Frankie and Ralph, who scrambled out of the car, their faces bright with expectation. Her face softened into an expression of warmth and pride River rarely, if ever, saw directed at him. It was a familiar, painful sight, a pattern of exclusion that had defined his relationship with her for years. Frankie, his sister, a whirlwind of bright energy, her laugh, echoing in the quiet street, rushed to hug Regan and Lakin. Her eyes, as they met Rivers for a fleeting moment through the window, held a calculated appraisal, a hint of something sharp beneath the surface. Ralph, his biological brother, taller and quieter, his usual shy demeanor often masking a deeper current of resentment, offered a thin, almost forced smile to Lakin. River felt a strange, chilling detachment watching them interact. These people who shared his blood, but not his history, not his heart, not his trauma. They were strangers, and yet they were family, a paradox that haunted him. He walked to the front door, a forced smile pasted on his face, bracing himself for the inevitable, for the familiar sting of her gaze. Lakin, ever the gracious hostess, pulled him forward, her hand pressing into his lower back, a silent command to perform his part. Regan's eyes met his as he approached, a flicker of cold assessment, then a dismissive nod. No hug, no warm greeting, just a cold, familiar acknowledgement, as if he were a distant acquaintance she barely tolerated. "River," she said, her voice dry, a faint, almost imperceptible disapproval coloring the single word. "You look tired. Still at that school? I thought you'd be done by now." The implication of his failure, his prolonged struggle, his deviation from some unspoken expectation, hung in the air, sharp and cutting. He swallowed, the usual knot forming in his stomach, tightening with each word. "Hello, Regan. Yes, I am. Still at it. Frankie, however, seemingly oblivious to the tension, rushed forward, her eyes wide with genuine excitement, her bright energy a startling contrast to her mother's coldness. River, I can't believe you're here. I thought you were stuck at the hospital forever with all your big doctor stuff. She hugged him. A surprisingly warm embrace, but even in her touch, River sensed a subtle possessiveness, a claim to his burgeoning big doctor stuff as if it were a family asset. And Lakin, she gushed, pulling away from River to embrace Lakin again. Thank you so much for inviting us. This place is gorgeous. You're so generous. Ralph, following his sister's lead, offered a hesitant handshake to River, his gaze filled with a quiet curiosity that held a familiar undercurrent of resentment, a veiled jealousy that River had felt directed at him for years. Hey, River, heard you're doing well. Good for you. The words were clipped, almost a challenge. Lakin beamed, soaking in the compliments, the performance of the perfect wife and hostess in full swing. Of course, family is so important, especially at Christmas. And River is so busy with his studies and his other pursuits. It's wonderful to have everyone together. She glanced at River, her smile a little too tight, a silent reminder of the demands she was placing on him. River forced a polite smile, retreating to the fringes of the conversation, offering monosyllabic answers, his mind already drifting to the quiet of his studio, to the liberating anonymity of the velvet mask. He thought of the raw, aching melodies he could write about this very moment, about the suffocating nature of family expectation, about the price of hidden identity. This was shaping up to be a truly miserable Christmas already, and it had only just begun. The festive lights Lakin had strung throughout River's apartment felt less like decoration and more like glaring spotlights, illuminating every flaw, every tension, every uncomfortable silence. The air, thick with the scent of roasted turkey and simmering resentment, pressed in on him from every side. He tried to remain a silent observer, a ghost in his own home, but it was impossible. Regan, draped elegantly over the plush sofa Lakin had insisted on buying, surveyed the living room with a critical eye. This space is rather stark, isn't it, River? She commented, her voice thin, dismissive. So much bare wall. Doesn't quite say home, does it? It's hardly what I pictured for my successful son. Her gaze swept past River, lingering on Lakin, who offered a tight, sympathetic smile. Oh, we're still settling in, Regan, Lakin chimed in, ever the gracious hostess, seemingly oblivious to the insult. River's so busy with his studies and his music, we haven't had time for proper decorating. She gave River a pointed glance, a silent command to defend their shared space. Frankie, perched on the armrest, chimed in, her bright, artificial smile unwavering. It's very minimalist, Lakin. Very him. She gestured vaguely at River, as if he were another piece of abstract art she couldn't quite decipher. But honestly, River, you'd think with all the money you're making now, you'd splurge on something with a bit more warmth. A proper dining set, maybe? This table looks like it belongs in a clinic waiting room. Her words sliced, casually dismissing his taste, his choices, his entire life. Ralph, who had been conspicuously quiet, nursing a beer, finally spoke, his voice low, tinged with that familiar, bitter jealousy. Yeah, I heard you're practically famous, River. Big shots are calling. Must be easy to forget where you came from when you're rubbing elbows with the elite. Not like us working honest jobs. He paused, taking a slow sip. My apartment isn't exactly stark. It's paid for, though. River's jaw tightened. He felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, the old rage, long buried but never truly gone, beginning to simmer. He forced a smile, tight and brittle. I appreciate your concern for my decor, Frankie. And Ralph, I haven't forgotten anything. I'm just busy. And this, he gestured vaguely at the room, is home. It suits me. Lakin's phone buzzed then, a welcome distraction. She glanced at it, her eyes lighting up. Oh, Ireland's on her way. She insisted on coming for dinner and said she couldn't miss this family gathering. River felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Ireland, his so-called friend, was precisely what he didn't need right now. Her presence always magnified the tension, her subtle barbs always hitting their mark. Dinner was a slow-motion disaster. The expensive china Lakin had bought for the occasion clinked against the glass tabletop, amplifying every strained silence. Regan picked at her food, making vague comments about the turkey being a little dry and the gravy uninspired. Frankie launched into a long, rambling story about a recent financial setback, her eyes frequently flicking to River, a transparent plea for assistance. Ralph, meanwhile, remained sullen, his gaze fixed on River with an almost palpable resentment. So, River, Ralph cut across Frankie's monologue, his voice loud, drawing everyone's attention. I hear you're making quite a name for yourself with this music thing. The Velvet Mask, isn't it? Very edgy. What's it like being a superstar and a doctor? Must be hard to keep up the facade, huh? He emphasized the word facade, a sneer twisting his lips. All that talk about helping people, and you're off playing dress up on stage. Bet your patients would love that. Rivers' fork clattered against his plate. He felt the blood drain from his face, then rush back, hot and furious. His music was his escape, his truth, his only remaining piece of himself. For Ralph to mock it, to expose it to Reagan's dismissive gaze, was a direct hit to his most vulnerable core. The trauma of Christmas, of his past abuse, of feeling utterly disposable, was already a suffocating blanket, and Ralph's words were a match to the kindling. What facade, Ralph? River asked, his voice low, dangerously quiet. The room seemed to shrink, the forced smiles disappearing. Oh, come on, Ralph scoffed, pushing his plate away. The whole anonymous act, it's ridiculous. You think you're fooling anyone? Everyone knows you're just trying to be edgy. And what about Lakin? Doesn't she get tired of being married to a ghost? He gestured dismissively at River, his eyes burning with resentment and envy. You're all about yourself, aren't you? Always have been. Always taking, never giving. Just like you always were. The words hit River like a physical blow, stripping away years of carefully constructed composure. Always taking, never giving. It was the cruel echo of his birth father's words, the very accusation that fueled his profound unworthiness and self-blame. The Christmas trauma, the sense of being an unwanted burden, combusted. He snapped. River launched himself across the table, a blur of motion, a primal roar tearing from his throat. The carefully arranged food, the glistening turkey, the vibrant cranberry sauce, the delicate mashed potatoes, all of it went flying. Plates shattered, glasses toppled, sending a cascade of food and broken glass across the pristine dining room. He grabbed Ralph by the collar, shoving him back hard against the wall. Ralph yelped in surprise, struggling to get free. River's fists, usually steady and capable of intricate surgical movements, now moved with a raw, brutal force, fueled by years of suppressed rage, by the echoes of his past, by the relentless pressure that had built inside him. He hit Ralph, a dull thud echoing through the horrified silence of the room. He hit him again and again, not caring where the blows landed, only needing to silence the cruel words to extinguish the burning shame. Lakin screamed, a high-pitched, piercing sound. Regan gasped, pushing her chair back, her face a mask of shock and disgust. Frankie shrieked, scrambling away from the chaos. River, stop it! Lakin cried, her voice laced with terror and fury, rushing forward, trying to pull him back. What are you doing? Have you lost your mind? He ignored her, his vision narrowed, focused only on Ralph's sneering face, the face of his childhood tormentor, of the casual cruelty that had followed him for years. Ralph collapsed, sliding down the wall, clutching his jaw, a smear of cranberry sauce on his cheek, mixed with a trickle of blood. Regan, her face pale, her eyes wide with a cold, piercing terror, shrieked, My son! What have you done, you monster? She scrambled to Ralph's side, pulling him close, shielding him. Are you on drugs again, River? Is that what this is? Just like before. I knew you hadn't changed. Her voice dripped with revulsion, her accusation cutting deeper than any punch. You're a danger. You're just like your father. You always were the problem. Frankie, tears streaming down her face, pointed a trembling finger at him. He's insane. He's always been crazy. What did you expect, Lakin? You brought him back into our lives, and he's just ruined everything as usual. The words, sharp and venomous, pierced through the red haze of River's rage. Just like your father. You always were the problem. Ruined everything. They were the very words that had fueled his unworthiness, his self-blame, the core of his Christmas trauma, the constant fear of being an unwanted burden, the sight of the shattered plates, the spilled food. The bleeding lip on Ralph's face confirmed their accusations. He had ruined everything. He always did. He stumbled back, his breath ragged, his hands shaking violently, smeared with food and a faint trace of Ralph's blood. The fury drained out of him, replaced by a cold, crushing wave of shame and self-loathing. He looked at the chaos he had wrought, the disgusted faces of his biological family, at Lakin's horrified stare, and knew there was no going back. He had confirmed all their worst fears, all their cruelest accusations. He turned, not bothering to wipe the food from his face, and stumbled through the wreckage, past the accusing stares, towards the only place he knew he could find a sliver of peace. He burst into his home studio, slamming the door shut behind him, plunging the room into a suffocating darkness. He fumbled for the light switch, then sank to the floor, breathing heavily, tears finally streaming down his face, hot and stinging. His hands were still trembling, not just from the adrenaline, but from the profound self-disgust. He had lost control. Again, just like before. He crawled towards his acoustic guitar, his fingers blindly searching for its familiar curves where he needed to play. He needed to sing. He needed to bleed out the poison festering inside him. He found a blank page in his songwriting notebook, his pen shaking as he scrawled words. Desperate, raw, ghosts holding my hand, pulling me down, whispers of who I used to be, a broken crown. The line he and Kate had shared in Berlin, so hopeful, so tender, now twisted into a bitter lament. He thought of Kate. The last he knew, she had left Belgium, where she'd been studying art, and gone somewhere to another country, another life. She was probably married now, settled, happy. She had probably forgotten all about him, the troubled boy from her past, the man who ruined everything he touched. He clung to the faint hope that she was safe, happy, and utterly unaware of the monster he could still become, and he wished with a desperate ache that transcended all logic that she hadn't let go of his hand, that her ghost was still the one that haunted him. The last thing River remembered before the exhaustion finally claimed him was the blurry, tear-stained page of his songwriting notebook. His pen had slipped from his numb fingers, leaving a faint, inky trail on the line he just scrawled. Ghosts holding my hand, pulling me down. Whispers of who I used to be. A broken crown. The words meant to capture the searing pain of Christmas and the fresh wound of his biological family's cruel accusations blurred before his eyes. He must have fallen asleep right there at his studio desk, the soft glow of the monitor illuminating his slumped form in the otherwise dark room. Sleep, for River, was rarely a peaceful respite, not since the accident, not since the dark days of his addiction, not since the relentless cycle of self-blame had settled deep in his bones. His nights were a landscape of restless tossing and turning, punctuated by sharp phantom body aches that lingered long after he woke, or by vivid, terrifying nightmares that dragged him back to the wreckage of his past. Sometimes it was the mangled metal of the truck, the sickening crunch of impact, the desperate, futile reach for a bottle that wasn't there. Other times it was the chilling echoes of Reagan's words, the feeling of invisible hands pushing him away, the profound, suffocating terror of abandonment. Tonight, his subconscious seemed to be replaying the tender, fleeting moments with Kate from that night in Berlin, twisting them with the brutal reality of her choosing someone else. Her smile, her touch, the scent of roses in her room. It all swirled into a bittersweet torment. He could almost feel her breath on his neck, hearing her whispered words from so long ago. Kate, he murmured, the name a soft, unconscious exhalation, a desperate plea from the depths of his sleep. It was a name that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken regrets, a longing that refused to die, even in the face of bitter reality. The sound of his own voice, raw and fragile, jarred him awake. His eyes open, disoriented, the dim light of the monitor still washing over his face. He blinked, shaking off the lingering tendrils of the dream. The phantom touch of Kate's hand. His body ached, a dull throb in his lower back, a constant companion since the wreck. His head pounded, a familiar hangover from emotional exhaustion, not alcohol. He sat up slowly, stiff and disoriented, the air in the studio cold and still. He listened, the silence of the apartment pressing in, thick and heavy. But then a faint, unfamiliar sound reached him from the kitchen. It was too soft to be definitive, too rhythmic to be casual, a muffled giggle, followed by a low, almost guttural moan. Then a distinct thump, like something heavy brushing against a hard surface. The sounds were intimate, unsettling, utterly out of place in the sterile quiet of his home. His brow furrowed in confusion. Then a cold knot of dread began to form in his stomach. Lakin was supposed to be asleep. Everyone else was supposed to be gone. He pushed himself off the chair, his movements stiff, wary, the tension in his shoulders tightening with each step. He moved silently, drawn by the unsettling sounds, his heart beginning to pound with an uneasy premonition. The last thing he wanted was to confront another ghost in his own house. River moved like a shadow through his own apartment, each step deliberate, hushed, as if invading enemy territory. The living room, still a wreckage of scattered wrapping paper and half-eaten holiday treats from Lakin's forced Christmas performance, felt even colder now, the festive lights mocking his unease. The sounds from the kitchen grew clearer, no longer muffled, now unmistakable. A woman's low laugh, a man's deeper chuckle, interspersed with soft, suggestive murmurs and the unmistakable creak of weight shifting against a surface. He felt a cold dread, a prickling sensation of invasion, before his mind even processed the implication. He reached the threshold of the kitchen, pausing just outside the frame of the doorway, his breath catching in his throat. The scene that unfolded before him was a grotesque tableau, illuminated by the soft glow of the under-cabinet lighting and the faint, artificial glow of the streetlights outside. There, draped across his sleek, expensive kitchen island, the very countertops he had argued with Lakin about, the ones he secretly despised but now felt a strange, possessive anger over, were Lakin and Ralph, naked. River's world tilted. The air left his lungs in a sudden, violent whoosh. He didn't gasp, didn't cry out, didn't make a sound. Shock, cold and absolute, froze him to the spot, a familiar numbness spreading through his limbs. It was the same shock he'd felt the night of the accident, the same disorienting blow of unexpected, devastating reality. Lakin's head was thrown back, faint moan escaping her lips, her dark hair splayed across the pristine white quartz. Ralph's hands were tangled in her hair, his back to River, his pale skin stark against the dark countertop. The sight was surreal, a nightmare made flesh, playing out in the very heart of his supposedly private space. His mind, usually so quick to analyze, to diagnose, to process, simply stalled. Ralph, his brother, the one who had just spent 2 days in this house, under his roof, subtly picking apart his life, fueled by envy. And Lakin, his wife, the woman he was divorcing, yes, but still his wife. The contract, the arrangement, the facade, it all shattered in that single horrifying moment. The sounds continued, oblivious to his presence, the low moans, the rhythmic shifting of bodies, the soft, intimate murmurs. He felt a wave of nausea, not just from the shock, but from the profound violation of his space, of his minimal expectations of respect, the precise, expensive countertops brought to impress Lakin's friends, now desecrated by this crude public display. It was a grotesque performance right there in his kitchen for no audience but him. A cold, bitter laugh, humorless and without joy, bubbled up in his chest, threatening to escape. That was it, right? The final insult. The ultimate proof of his unworthiness, his disposability. He was a ghost in his own life, so easily disregarded, so easily replaced, even by those who shared his blood or his bed. The familiar ache of abandonment, the chilling echoes of his biological parents' rejection, screamed through his mind. He finally understood the full extent of Lakin's contempt, of Ralph's venomous jealousy. This wasn't about sex. This was about power, about control, about utterly erasing him. River found his voice then, a raw, guttural sound that tore through the intimate scene, shattering the fragile illusion of their privacy. It was a voice he rarely used, a sound born of primal rage and profound disgust. "Get off my counter!" The words, though low, cracked like a whip in the silent kitchen. Lakin's eyes opened wide with shock, her body stiffening. Ralph froze, his head snapping up, his face contorting in surprise and something akin to a desperate fear. He scrambled, awkwardly trying to cover himself, his bare skin a pale, offending sight against the cool quartz. Lakin, after a stunned silence, fumbled to pull a dish towel across her chest. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for a way to regain control of the narrative. Ralph's hand slapped uselessly against the countertop as he tried to steady himself. His face flushed, not with shame, but with the humiliation of being caught off guard. River said nothing for a long moment, just stared at them, his expression unreadable. The silence pressed like a weight, more damning than any outburst. Ralph, now fumbling to gain some semblance of dignity, glared at River, his eyes still wide with surprise, but quickly hardening into resentment. "River, what the hell, man? You can't just barge in here." His voice was a pathetic whine, yet still laced with a familiar bravado. River took a step further into the kitchen, his gaze burning not with jealousy, but with a cold, righteous fury at the sheer disrespect. "My counter, Ralph. My kitchen. My home. You think this is appropriate during Christmas?" "Oh, come on, River!" Ralph snarled, finally managing to pull on his discarded underwear, a pathetic attempt at modesty. He looked at Lakin, then back at River, his face twisting into a sneer of triumph. "You don't appreciate her." He gestured vaguely at Lakin. "You don't appreciate anything." "So, yeah, I thought, why not? If you're not going to use it, why should it go to waste?" Lakin, now fully clothed in a hastily wrapped towel, stepped forward, her face a mask of cold fury, her initial shame evaporating into defiance. "He's right, River. He's absolutely right. You're never here. You're a ghost in your own home. You wanted a divorce, remember? You said it yourself. You don't touch me. You don't want me. My needs have to be met, River. I'm a woman. Her voice rose with each word, a desperate plea for justification, for validation of her own selfish desires. You are cold, River, cold and distant. What did you expect? River listened, his gaze sweeping over them both, his eyes cold, devoid of warmth or even anger. The rage that had driven him to attack Ralph earlier had burned itself out, replaced by a chilling, profound detachment. The scene before him wasn't a betrayal of love, because there was no love to betray. It was merely a confirmation of the rot that had festered in his life, a grotesque parody of connection. Needs met, River echoed, his voice flat, his gaze settling on Lakin, then flicking to Ralph, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. You both have needs, I understand, and apparently you're both very resourceful in meeting them. His voice held no anger, no pain, just a profound, unsettling indifference. Frankly, Lakin, I don't care what you do. I don't care who you do it with. My only concern is that you chose my kitchen counter for your little rendezvous. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine disgust. That's a $5,000 piece of quartz, Lakin. You could have gone to a motel. Or, God forbid, your own bed. Lakin gasped, her face reddening with a mix of fury and disbelief at his detached reaction, his utter lack of emotional investment. You don't care? She shrieked, clutching the towel tighter. You're my husband. This is your brother. You don't care? No, River said, his voice cold, calm, the words slicing through the air. I don't. Means to an end, Lakin. A contract, a visa, nothing more. And as for you, Ralph, he turned his gaze to his trembling biological brother, whose face was now a mixture of relief and bewildered shock at River's reaction. You wanted to hurt me? You think this hurts me? You think exposing Lakin and yourself on my countertop is some grand act of vengeance? It's pathetic, Ralph. Honestly, it just makes me pity you. And it tells me everything I already knew about both of you. He shook his head, a weary sigh escaping his lips. I don't care what you do with each other. It doesn't touch me. It's just tacky. And now, leave my kitchen. Both of you, clean this mess up. He didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned on his heel, leaving them amidst the shattered plates and spilled food, the smell of burnt turkey and something sickeningly intimate, and walked away. His mind already set on one thing, escape. The bedroom door clicked shut behind him, a soft sound swallowed by the silence. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, the silence felt clean, blessed. No voices, no performance, no betrayal thickening the air, just stillness. He was done. Truly, irrevocably, utterly done. His eyes swept across the room, taking in the carefully curated, impersonal decor Lakin had chosen. The sleek, minimalist furniture, the framed abstract art. It wasn't his home, not truly. It was a gilded cage, a stage set for a life he never wanted. And now, even that illusion had crumbled. He walked to the large walk-in closet, its interior a sterile expanse of hanging clothes. He didn't need much. His bag was already packed from his frequent trips to Charlie's and his anonymous recording sessions. A small, worn leather duffel that held the essentials. He pulled it out, unzipped it, and began to throw in a few more items. A fresh change of clothes, his passport, his well-worn running shoes, a small, unassuming notebook where he jotted down song lyrics, his phone charger. Each item was a practical, necessary step away from this suffocating existence. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts, just a cold, methodical determination. He heard the frantic, muffled sounds of Lakin's voice, rising in a desperate crescendo from the living room, followed by the low, strained murmur of Ralph. She was probably trying to salvage the ruined dinner, to explain away the inexplicable, to put the shattered pieces of her perfect Christmas performance back together. The thought barely registered. Their problems were no longer his. He pulled a thick, dark hoodie from a hanger, its familiar softness a comfort. He knew he was running again, just as he had run from Berlin after the accident, just as he had run from his biological parents. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't a desperate flight from something so much as a decisive leap towards something, even if that something was a terrifying unknown void. It was an escape born of profound self-preservation, not just fear. The bedroom door burst open then, crashing against the wall. Lakin stood there, her face blotchy and red, streaked with tears and remnants of mascara. Her expensive dress was stained with turkey gravy, her hair disheveled. She looked, for the first time in years, truly vulnerable, truly desperate. River, please. We have pictures together, holiday posts. My parents are coming tomorrow. She was pleading for control, not for him. He ignored her, his movements methodical as he zipped up his duffel bag. He shrugged on the hoodie, pulling the hood low over his head. She rushed forward, grabbing his arm, her fingers digging into his bicep. River, please! Don't go. Don't do this. We can fix this. We can talk. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. Her voice cracked, begging. You said you didn't care. You said it didn't matter. River stopped, his back to her, and slowly, deliberately shrugged off her hand. Her touch felt alien, repulsive. He could still feel the phantom residue of Ralph's presence on his counter. He turned, his blue eyes, usually shadowed, now hard and utterly devoid of emotion, meeting hers. The coldness in his gaze was absolute, a mirror of the emptiness in his heart for her. He threw the duffel bag over his shoulder, the weight of it a welcome burden. You're right, Lakin, he said, his voice low, flat, every syllable precise and final. I don't care. Not what you do or who you do it with. You said my needs weren't met. And you're right. Now my needs will be met. And my need is for this to end, for good. He paused at the door, her pleading face a blurry mess of tears and desperation. He took a breath, the words he had yearned to speak for months, for years, finally forming cold and clear. I want a divorce, Lakin, he said, the same words she'd once waved away like a tantrum. But this time, I mean it. He didn't wait for her reply, for her inevitable outburst, her renewed pleas or threats. He simply walked out, leaving the door ajar behind him, leaving her screaming his name in the wreckage of their shattered life. The sound of her wails followed him down the silent corridor, but he didn't look back.